Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're telling the stories of Kansas City nonprofits and the people behind them. Casey Cares is the intersection of the profit and the nonprofit communities, making Kansas City a better place to live, work, and play. Casey Cares is proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. I'm Ruth Baum-Biggis. Analytics play an important role in almost every sector imaginable, and nonprofit community is no exception. Through efforts like the annual Giving USA report, you can learn a lot about patterns of giving, trends, who's giving and why. Sector analytics are important. For example, 88% of fundraising dollars come from 12% of donors. But it's also important to bring the data discussion down to the micro level. And joining us to discuss that prospect is our Dr. Philanthropy, Jeffrey Byrne of Byrne Pelofsky Associates. We're so glad to have you back.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm glad to be here. And thank you for the topic today. I think it's a really important topic. And I think it's very timely by the fact that today, using data and analyzing it and then knowing how to strategically implement it is really part of the fundraising process. And this process of data analytics and data collection has been going on as far as nonprofits have been going on, but the sophistication of the tools that are available to nonprofits today are better than ever. So I've been in this field for 33 years, practicing as a practitioner of fundraising, and now as a strategist and consultant to nonprofits for the past 21 years through Byrne Pelofsky and Associates. And, I call it fundraising malpractice if you don't utilize research in your approach in fundraising. So, Ruth, you understand what malpractice is? And married to a lawyer. And I feel that malpractice is really, it is really critical that nonprofits develop and devote a small amount of money toward good data analytics. Let me define really what prospect research is. And then we can go on in a conversation about data collection, how to identify donors, cultivating relationships, and then making donations. Prospect research really, Ruth, is the process of using data that's collected from hundreds of millions of pieces to learn more about prospective donors or your donors. And that's basically very simple. And, in the nonprofit arena, we utilize data that is non-proprietary. So we are not using vehicles that have your credit information, your financial history, or other proprietary means that are certainly out there and all commercial vendors are utilizing. Every time we go to a website and sign up and agree to terms, we have just released our data. And I think we know now more than ever the importance of data integrity. And so we believe that a good donor prospect and research is really important, whether you know your donors 100% or not, because believe me, there are some members on your donor file that you're going to be surprised with the data that turns up.
All right. So you said it's going to be malpractice if we don't do it. For the 8,000 plus nonprofits out there, we know that about half of them are dealing with much smaller budgets than the other half. And when you say data analytics, I think probably our audience, there's a lot of, big eyes, raising and thinking money, 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 money. So let's take that next step. Tell us, if you make that decision, where do you go next and how do you do it?
Well, there's some good platforms there that are out in the commercial marketplace. And I think that, those are one area of research. Bottom line is anyone can do a Google on a prospect. You can do a revert, you can do a white pages, you can do a yellow pages, you can do other types of information for free on the internet. And you certainly should do that and utilize that as part of your platform. But organizations like Donor Search or Blackbaud Analytics or iWave or others are really good resources for the nonprofits. And let me explain how they collect their data. Okay. They have approximately 20 sources from different companies that are pulling data constantly and then absorbing that data into a model. And then each of the proprietary companies, iWave, Donor Search, Blackbaud Analytics, they have their own algorithms specific to their own company, and then they and that's how they market themselves. So, for instance, let's say the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art. They want to go out and look at the marketplace and see what their donors' capacities are. So what they would do is, number one, they would choose a provider like Donor Search, iWave, Blackbaud Analytics. There are others out there as well, but those are three that I'm very familiar with. Wealth Engine, since they are members of the Giving Institute, I know that they have been already vetted, and I have used each one of those four sources as well. So I would recommend those. They're going to cost about the same anyway. So I would say use something that's been vetted and that we know something about. And what the Kemper Museum would have to do is that there's going to be a spreadsheet that they then download their donor information, including name, address, contact information, their donor history, their volunteer history, their fundraising event history. And they just download data into a platform. That platform then is uploaded, and that is then sent to one of the companies. Then what they do is they take that file that has been sent to them, and they run it through their computer and their algorithm. And literally, they have hundreds of millions of pieces of data, and they come out with a profile of a donor with suggestions for an annual gift request, a plan giving request, a major gift request. They might have information like what was the donor's largest gift that they've given. They might have information like what is the political giving that that donor has made. They might have their company's net assets. They might have their company's gross sales. They might have, there are hundreds of pieces of data that come back per file. And what you need to do, and that's where we come in at Byrne Pelofsky and Associates, or a good fundraiser, is that you have to then take that information and you have to understand how to utilize it, narrow it down, and then how is that going to benefit your organization?
Well, I don't know if you could tell, my eyes were getting larger and larger and larger, but you get all this great data. So how do you know what to use and not be overwhelmed by all this information that you can get?
Well, for instance, we are working with Wyandotte Behavioral Health Network, or Kansas City, Kansas Community College, or out of town, the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art. And all of those that we have run through one of these proprietary platforms. We've taken their data, they've downloaded it, sent it to us. We review it, and then we send it to, for instance, Donor Search, one of the companies I mentioned. And then they come back a week or two later with downloaded results. And the major spreadsheet that we see and we look, and we're having a meeting this afternoon for the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art, where I will be in 2 weeks to present the information. They will have, we will look at probably 45 pieces of data per record. And what we need to do then is synthesize that data down to about 3 or 4 data points. Okay, we don't need 45 different columns reviewing, because what you can do is you can just get into a rabbit hole and fall and never get out.
Right. So what are usually, when you do that, what are those 3 or 4 things you look at? Or does it become very specific depending on the nonprofit?
Well, I think I could generalize. I can generalize what any nonprofit would need to look at. According to what we do, we at Byrne Pelofsky are major gift consultants to capital campaigns, to annual campaigns, to plan giving, grant writing. So what we're interested in is looking for a few key markers. Number one is, what is your affinity to that organization? And all the companies that you would obtain information from, they will have an affinity score about what is the likelihood of giving that donor has to your organization. Now, you could ask me how they come up with it, and I can tell you I have no idea. But I know each company does that. And for instance, with Donor Search, we will look for a score of 300. And 300 is they're going to give to you, they love you, they've given to you, and you know them, or you need to know them. And so we'll go down maybe from 300 to 200, and we will look at all the donor files in that range. Another area that we look for is wealth capacity. What is your wealth capacity based on the recommendations that they make? And in that area, we are looking at what is the recommendation that is made based on Donor Search, would be what a donor can give over a 5-year period as a pledge to any and all nonprofits that he or she would give to. And then we then merge those files into one and prioritize it for our clients. And then we deliver that. We deliver the entire report because that's what they paid for. Okay. It's their report, not ours. It goes right directly to them. And then we help them to understand then how to take those 45 pieces of data and narrow it down to 3 or 4. And then we delivered, for instance, to a nonprofit last week that I mentioned prior to this. And what they do is, what we do with them is then we look for ways of how you're going to cultivate your donors and how you're going to approach your donors and prospects based on the information that you have. And that's where the art of fundraising comes in versus the science of fundraising.
We're talking with Dr. Philanthropy, Jeffrey Byrne with Byrne Pelofsky. We know that there are some folks out there, of course, who don't have capacity necessarily to hire your organization or someone else to help do this. And you mentioned earlier, there are public ways to get some information. What, again, I keep honing in on this, should you be looking for? You said if there's an affinity. So I would think even going back into your own records of your organization, if you've got some longevity, for example, and see who's given to you in the past, who may not be giving to you now, and trying to figure out why they aren't giving to you now. What's your thought on like sending out a Survey Monkey or something like that, that's a free tool to try to get at some of that information that a nonprofit may not be able to afford to purchase?
I think that's a really good idea. And let me just back up a second and just talk about cost. There is cost associated with this. When we go to Donor Search, iWave, Wealth Engine, or Blackbaud Analytics, they're going to charge us per file on a per file basis that they screen. And let's say if you send in 5,000 files, the cost of that is probably going to be in the range of $3,000 to $5,000. And that's not cost prohibitive if you're thinking about a $2, $5, or $10 million fundraising effort. But let's back up and say, what can you do to look in your own files before you do something like that? And I think you said it right. Number one, you look at your donors and who are giving to you consistently each year. And in which categories are they giving to you consistently each year? Do you have a level of donor where you are a major gift? Some organizations define a major gift at 1,000. Others define it at 10,000 or what have you. And I think that that's one area that I would ask a nonprofit to do is run a report, download into an Excel sheet from your fundraising software, all your donations in a descending order cumulatively per donor file. So you see then you can just run a file and you can see from the donor who's giving you the most to the very least. And that's one way of looking at it. Then I think that it's all about segmentation. I believe in fundraising is all about segmenting your files down and getting more specific and being as specific as you possibly can before you go out and do the art of fundraising. It's the science, it's the planning, and this is just part of that planning. So, are they volunteers with you? Have they been donors? Are they lapsed donors? Have they given a cumulative of $1,000 over the last 3 years? Have they given $5,000 cumulatively over the last 3 years? You can run a lot of different reports in Excel based or in your fundraising software based on criteria that you can come up with ad infinitum. Okay. So I think you really have to understand how to narrow it down and then how are you going to utilize the output of what you get into the fundraising process?
Well, we're going to put some of these tips up on our Facebook page so that folks can see what you all are offering as the doctors of philanthropy, your team. One of the points I noticed, though, is talking about cultivating those relationships. And maybe this is where the art of fundraising comes in. What suggestions or, again, tips, overused word, do you have in trying to cultivate those relationships? And, I assume you would start with people who are already donating rather than, let's say, the top 10 most philanthropic people in Kansas City. But yes, you advise us.
Well, I think first you have to have a message. And your message has to have an emotional connection with your donor. So, what is it that you are creating to offer, and how are you offering that? So I think number one, determining what your message is extremely important. Then the second area I think that you need to determine is how you're going to deliver that message. Are you going to deliver it one-on-one? Are you going to deliver it in small groups? Are you going to deliver it via email, text messages, or social media? So, there are a lot of different platforms that a nonprofit has to choose from. So I think that that's part of it, that, for your entire file, you might think about, okay, are we going to do an email campaign? Are we going to do a social media campaign? Are we going to take our message and define it and then refine it for target audiences within our geographic area or our constituency as well? So I think you have to understand how to connect with those prospects via some vehicles that you can utilize. And then I think what you have to do is then personalize your marketing materials. You have to make it personal. I don't like to get a letter that says, "Dear donor," and if a nonprofit is sending out an email or a social media that is "Dear donor," shame on you. Personalize it, because the tools that we have available today make it that we are able to customize our messages to the donor segment that we are wanting to talk to, and then making sure that we create a call to action. Okay, what is it that the message is delivering, and what is the call to action? And that's then what we call the fundraising. And the art of what we do, not what we talked earlier with, the science.
I'm going to bring in that big P word, and that's pandemic. We talked, I know, over a year ago. I remember our conversation just weeks after shutdown, thank goodness for Zoom, about how to go about cultivating those relationships in a lockdown world. Okay, we're a little less locked down now, but we still have that in our midst. What, from your wisdom-based knowledge, Dr. Philanthropy, do you suggest in cultivating those relationships in this world where not everybody's real comfortable? Let's just not get into the political of it, but how do you do that?
Well, I think number one, as you and I have done, Ruth, during the last 19 months of the pandemic, we have created our own boundaries, and we have acknowledged what individuals' boundaries are and what their risk tolerance is. And I think that if we are going out and trying to talk at lunch in small groups or large groups or one-on-one, we first have to ask the prospective donor or our donor what their risk tolerance is and how they'd like to be approached. I think that acknowledgement of asking the question and then responding affirmatively about how that person wants to be approached has been my approach for 20 months. I have a risk tolerance that I'm very specific with, and I run into people that are much more hibernating at home and isolating than I am. And I completely understand that, and I respect that. But I think that I think that you've got to return to normalcy to some degree. And I think that I believe that we are seeing our nonprofits that we work with re-engaging on a personal level with their donors and their prospects. Now, I'm not going to say they're going back to where we were in February of last year. It's modified, but they are they're getting out there. And I think nonprofits can't use the excuse of a pandemic to keep away from personalization and going out and calling on donors. Second is
not answering phone calls during wonderful webcasts. No, I'm giving you a hard time.
Very sorry about that, Ruth.
Not to worry.
I have just taken my phone and I have turned it off.
But that's one of the joys of the pandemic, right? Forgiveness in the Zoomosphere. So you're going on to a second point. Once, find out a way to engage and deal with people's risk tolerance, trying to return to some normalcy.
And I think that this platform is really creating a real useful tool. And probably 80% of what we're doing in our business, working with nonprofits, is doing it just like this. Yes, I go out 4 or 5 times a week to client sites and meet with them, but I do that about every other week or every 3 weeks. And what I'm doing is utilizing this process of this. Lisa Pelofsky, my associate, we were just on a call at 8:30 this morning, and Lisa tells me she has 7 Zoom meetings today. I call that Zoom hell. Okay. And, but I have 4 Zoom meetings today, and I'm already in my second one, and it's, here we are. So I think that you have to utilize the technology that is there to your advantage. And there should be no excuses about you not being able to use technology. If there are excuses about that, then I think you got to go back and ask why, because this is normality as far as I can see into the rest of the year and next year, unfortunately.
Well, I want to get back. We kind of went a field of data, but I think this is playing an important part, because if you've got that data and everything, then you've got to be able to utilize it. And then when you're on that Zoom meeting, not just get so bogged down in those numbers. One of the other points that I pulled from some of the suggestions you had is that online donation process is here to stay. And you've got some pretty strong opinions about how to do that and how to do that well.
That's right. And I feel that that's just another platform of accepting donations and soliciting donations. So I think there are a few good rules of thumb. And you can go to our website at byrnepelofsky.com and pull this from the August 12 newsletter that is on our blog site. But as Ruth is mentioning, I think making online donations is you need to make it simple, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. So, and I'm stupid, so I like to keep things simple, Ruth. But I think that we have to brand our donation page to your website. So I think that you have to understand what your website is. What is the personality of your organization, and how is that personality reflected in your website? Because that is actually your front door. And that is where folks are landing. And that's where you want them to land to understand more information, and then go to that donation button. So whatever your donation page is should be branded according to your organization. I think you've got to make sure it's optimized for mobile devices. So you know what? You make sure it's going to be, it's going to look good on your phone. You're going to make sure it looks good on an iPad, and obviously on your computer. I think that you've got to, we believe in being minimalist in your approach to this as well. You can go and create a real fancy page, but something that's simple and direct is probably going to benefit you more, because donors only spend so many seconds or minutes on a page. And you need to realize that. They're not going to read they're not reading a book when they come to the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art. They're looking for a specific topic. So I think that. I think as then it relates to your donor page, then you have to think about opting in on recurring donors or recurring donations. I go and make donations to each of the organizations that we work with. So over this year, I've probably gone to 60 nonprofits and made a donation. And one of the things I look at when I'm making a donation is, are they asking me to opt in, or is this a recurring monthly donation? And I make sure that I let them know exactly what I want to do with my donation. So I think that you want a recurring donation. I mean, that's the whole idea of online giving at times is if we can get them to opt in so that they're giving on a consistent basis and it just recurs, then that's a different form. You might want to make sure that They have matching gifts as well. Ask them about that. And you might want to say, give them definitely suggested giving amounts.
As always, Dr. Philanthropy, you have fabulous advice for us and nonprofits, and we'll put some of this on our Facebook page as well. It's Byrne Pelofsky and Jeffrey Byrne. Thank you as always.
Thank you, Ruth. It's nice to be with you.
Thank you for listening to Casey Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're produced by Charitable Communications, and we're proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. To be a guest on Casey Cares or underwriting opportunities, visit our website at caseycaresonline.org and spread the love. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Casey Cares Radio and Instagram at Casey Cares Online, and encore shows on ESPN 1510 AM and 94.5 FM, Saturday mornings at 8. Thank you for listening to Casey Cares.